Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ophir. I am a second-year MBA at MIT Sloan. It is my pleasure to introduce our panel, the analytics-driven franchise building a modern NBA team. Our panelists today are Ariana Andunian, Vice President of Player Personnel at the Philadelphia 76ers, Shane Battier, two-time NBA champion and founder, Monty McNair, General Manager at the Sacramento Kings, Dean Oliver, data scientist at ESPN. Our panel will be moderated by John Hollinger, senior writer at The Athletic. The panel will run for 40 minutes, and we will leave 5 minutes at the end for questions. Please submit questions via our Cadence app. With that, I'll turn it over to you, John.
All right, hello everyone. Let's get right to it. For the OGs like me and Dean, who were at this first one 19 years ago, back then we were dealing with like an information deficit. Like we couldn't even get enough data. Now we almost have the opposite problem, right? Like we have cameras and player health metrics and all kinds of stuff. And how do we manage all this and turn it into decisions, though? So Monty, I'll start with you since you're in the GM spot where you're having to make a lot of these choices. Like how do we take all this information and funnel it into actual decisions at this point?
Well, one good thing is analytics departments have grown. So we have a really good one. They're here somewhere. And so they start it and gather all this information and try to harness it. And then I think the question is like, where can you have throughput? So whether that's a front office, evaluation or decision, your coaching staff, maybe directly to your players. And, obviously with Shane in Houston, we had some of that. But you really have to pick and choose, like, what is the highest leverage information that you can get all the way to something that can affect winning.
And are we catching up to the information, or are we falling further behind?
It's a little bit of both. So obviously the tracking data we've now had for 8, 9 years, whatever it is, 10 years. We just got the pose data, so we're behind again. And I think you also mentioned the kind of sports science, I think, is another one where we have way more information than we know what to do with. So that's just another frontier that we can try to play catch up to. But every time we think we catch up, we get new data. And I think that pose data is going to be something we're chasing for the next 5 to 10 years.
And then Dean, I mean, you were with the Wizards coaching staff from that side. Like, how do you manage all this information that's coming in and turn it into action when you're playing 82 games in 177 days or whatever it is?
There is a danger of information overload, no doubt about it. For the players, like that's who you don't want to confuse. You want the players to go in and react on instinct, just very well trained instinct, and with less practice time, all of this sort of thing. You have to make sure that you build those instincts in practice if you can, but then just accept that part of the season, the early part of the season, they're feeling it out. You try to give them some information, get a sense for who's Shane Battier and who can absorb everything versus the other guys who can only take so much at a time. And I had good relationships with certain players who they would tell me, that's enough. I can't take any more of these numbers. Or even if it wasn't numbers, just any more coaching on this. I'm still working on this. I want to fix this thing. So there is information overload. But what I'd like to say, though, our decisions now, they're the same decisions we made 20 years ago, 40 years ago. They're the same, like who to play, how to make them better. It's the same stuff. The numbers just help refine how you do it. And so you don't need the numbers. It's just our job to filter it before it gets to the users.
And Shane, you were famously a guy who loved to have access to these numbers. From a player side, like what's the best way to receive all this information?
Well, first of all, what Daryl did and what Sam Hinkie did with me, they communicated it in a way that made sense, right? And they came to me and said, hey, do you want the answers to the test before you take it? I said, yes. And that led us on a journey of really understanding the numbers that mattered, that were new numbers. And so that's the way I looked at it. I looked at it as, these are the answers to the test. Why wouldn't I want this? In fact, give me more. But it all starts with a clear communication of the value proposition for the player. For the player, they're going to do whatever they can to be better, just a little bit better. And for me, I was lucky to be on the ground floor with Daryl and Sam.
Do you sense now that players are more receptive to that in general, though?
they don't run from the math anymore. I don't know how many are actively seeking it. Are people, knocking on your door saying, "Hey, give me more"?
Depends on the guy.
Okay, all right. But
I think Shane is unique in that way, but that's why we have people with the roles they have. So we have somebody on our staff, Robbie Lemons, who played at Stanford, and his job is to take that information, get it to the coaches, and then it's their job to get it to the players. And so they have to kind of pick and choose what goes, but how it goes, right? But they're already trying to say, like, these are the 3 most important things that I need you to do. How do I communicate that? Maybe with Shane, it's give him a booklet. Maybe with Dean, it's sit down and show him 3 clips, right? And so you have to that's obviously the coach's job. How do I get that information such that it's going to be actionable on the floor? And that's player to player.
And I hate to dispel dreams here. I'm sorry. Whenever you get hired by a team and you're an analyst, all right, it's your thought that, okay, I'm going to sit with Bam Adebayo at the team pregame meal, and we're going to talk about the best way to defend Jokic. All right, that's probably not going to happen. Okay, and so I just want to be full of transparency here.
Yeah.
But the players have been raised. You look at the oldest players in the NBA in their 30s or something. They've mostly been raised in the analytics generation.
Yeah.
So to some degree, they're more familiar with it than the coaches,
Yep.
who are 20 years older.
Yeah.
So I found that they were actually more comfortable with things than some coaches.
Good point.
Well, this is a great way to introduce Ariana, because you're scouting a lot of these players who are part of the younger cohort now. So are you finding that they're kind of more receptive to this information and use it more in their games?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good point by Dean that it is just kind of the norm at this point. I think different players have different calibration for how much they want to discuss it in a formal way, but maybe in an informal way, I think is a big piece of it, where it's like maybe you're using slightly different terminology, but they know what you're talking about. They're capable of understanding everything you're talking about because they've heard it, or they've seen it on Twitter, or they've seen it on ESPN. But it's, yeah, the different players, I think, have different want for the depth of it or just the high level of it. But yeah, I think they're all pretty comfortable knowing what some level of the terminology is.
And on getting back to kind of this information fire hose we're facing now, on the scouting side, like, how do you manage all that information to kind of strain out what's really valuable?
Yeah, I think to what Monty had mentioned earlier about like the amount of data coming in, I think it's definitely changed on the scouting side too. With college and with NBA, obviously we've like had a history of data maybe a little bit more, but something like international or grassroots, which is essentially the high school space, especially with grassroots, we're kind of just starting to get at least a decent history of data coming through that lens and being able to use that still very early in that. International, so many different leagues to get good quality data from. So it is a huge part of what we do, but that one I think is still growing maybe at a different pace than some of the like on-court data is for the NBA.
John, I'd be curious to hear. So we all have a data set that is roughly similar, okay? Talk about how you think differently about the data. You know, that may be more important than the actual data itself, and how you think differently than the competition, right?
Yeah, well, I think you can have a data advantage, which is pretty much going away. The league has standardized a lot of that. You can't really have more or different data, at least for like the biggest stuff. Then there's how well you can analyze it. I think there's certainly some advantage to be had there. And then what I talked about before, then the throughput, right? If you have great data, you analyze it great, you can't make any decisions or put on the floor, that's an issue. So I think those are like the three tranches, and whereas before maybe it was one that was driving a lot of it, I think we're in the world of the second and third.
That to me has been like a secret differentiator for like the last decade or so that is kind of going away, is getting that last step of making it part of the organization's kind of mindset and ethos and how they attack things, from coaching staff to the front office, like getting it to the final layer of the decision where even the owner is like, okay, like I get this, and I don't know, I mean, I'm speaking from my own experience now and hearing about other people's as well. But to me, that's kind of the final frontier. And even that is starting to get conquered now.
If I could just comment quickly on something Monty said as well on the analyzing data. I think something interesting too is a lot of times we do have the similar data, but you can use it to make different arguments, i.e. like Monty and I might disagree on a player and he could use the data to support his argument and I can use the data to support my argument. And that piece of it gets kind of interesting because we're both using the data, but we're using it and manipulating it in a way that makes our argument stronger, and that gets like an interesting debate as well.
The old saying is if you torture a number badly enough, it will tell you anything.
Yeah.
Player acquisition is kind of the most direct application of numbers, though, but there's all these other things. You're asking about ways to differentiate. Like, there's just more steps to get from numbers to application on the coaching side or in the medical side, because you have to use the numbers to suggest a treatment or something like that. And then you have to communicate it to the trainer, who then has to convince the player through their relationship. So it's more indirect, but you may have people in your organization or yours that are particularly good at that, and that becomes an advantage.
So this takes me to my next question. So my plan is working perfectly. Because so much originally with analytics was, I mean, Dean, we were doing like, offensive rating, defensive rating, like stating what had happened on the court. The thing we're really trying to do in an NBA organization is figure out what will happen, right? Who's going to be good next year, the year after that, and how much they're going to be worth. So what are the challenges in taking all this information and going to predictive modeling so that we can act on it and win?
You're looking at me for this one? Because they're not going to talk about it? No, you definitely,
Panel veteran right there.
Yeah, the predictive is what you want. And the problem is you can make predictions, say the chance that a player is going to be an all-star, and your best model is going to change the number from, say, 60% to 68% or something like that. It's not going to make a dramatic difference for any single player, but you hope that aggregates over a lot of players. That extra 8%, you're doing better than you were before. And so it's tough. It's funny to me, like draft models, I don't think have gotten a whole lot better in the last 15 years than what they were before. Okay, there's still all of this other stuff in terms of player development that you need to model and use to build better players that then fit your 68%. Yes, 68%, they're going to be that. But if you have the wrong player development, they're going to be on that 32% side.
Since I'll take that question to you, since you're on the scouting side, like, are you finding that these models are working much better than they used to, even with all the information we have and all the whiz-bang tools that we can throw at it?
Hard for me to say. I haven't been in the NBA 15 years, but I guess 10 years ago to now, and from 3 different organizations as well. I think you've definitely seen improvement. It's interesting also how different organizations use the models as a piece of the decision-making, as the final decision-making, at what stage do we pull that information in, and at what stage do we start talking about it and match it with the eye test. I think that part has gotten better. So maybe it's someone's popping in the model and we're watching them at a different stage than we used to. The level of accuracy, I think, is probably hard to say, but I think maybe how we're using the information has probably improved in that time.
Fully agree.
One of the other things I want to talk to you guys about is one of the big challenges that the league is facing right now is just keeping players on the court. I mean, we're seeing teams even again this year that are basically running out of players as the season goes on. I can't think of any of them offhand, but and we're using all these on the team side, the medical side, what do they call? What do these guys call themselves now?
What?
Physios?
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, you're talking about just the health and performance.
Yeah, performance staff. That was the word I was looking for. And so we have these teams have all these investments in it. They've ramped up, and we haven't really done anything for the injury rate. Like, what are the challenges on that side to using analytics to actually help us keep our players healthy?
I think I said before, this is the place that we have the most room to grow. I don't know, Shane could probably talk more to it. I just think we just ask more and more of these guys. I mean, the game is just getting faster and more dynamic, and a lot of these guys are playing over the summer or deep into the playoffs. So I do think there's a ways to go there, but I think what we've learned over the last few years, we're getting there, but also is kind of like in partnership with these players, like how are you feeling? And it's not, and then because you need that to say like, what does this number mean? So I think there's a lot of room to grow there for sure.
Well, I have a story from the Stone Age when I played. Okay, in the days of what do they call it, rest and recovery now, or dedicated rest. When I played for the Memphis Grizzlies, okay, Hubie Brown, our coach, very old school, and Hubie's one of my favorite people in the entire world. We practiced every day except Sunday. That was a day for families. And so whether we had, this is back in the days when we played 4 games in 5 nights. I know, gasp, oh my gosh, you guys played 4 games in 5 nights? Crazy, right? Whether we got into Washington, D.C. at midnight or the day before, we practiced at 9 o'clock that next morning.
Wow.
And like, it was just what you did.
Yeah.
And so if anything, I think that like just the mentality has become much more conservative. Because look, teams have an incentive to keep their players healthy for long periods of time. Okay, so this is not just on the players that, oh, I don't want to play and they're being soft. No, like the teams and the coaches and the owners, they want their players for a long period of time, and they think the best way to do that is to not tax them as much. But Monty's right. I mean, the game is fast. The level of wear and tear of these young players coming into the league is way more than when I played, right? And so these players already have more miles coming into the league, and we don't know the implications of that right now.
I'll add too. I think one of the challenges is there's a mental part of practicing every day, and you get into a city like you got in at midnight and you're playing at 9 the next morning. That's tough. We had plenty of flights where we got in at 3 or 4. And you can't do it. They need the mental break as much as anything else. And one of the things that I have seen is there's evidence that players actually don't learn a lot during the season. They learn more between the seasons when they have that mental downtime to actually absorb that stuff. So
I do think the sleep is one area where
Yeah.
we've definitely gotten a lot better, and it's just all the research that comes out is how important that is, which is both not practicing at 9 if you got in at 2.
Yep.
Teams have been much better at that, but also, I mean, there's a big nap culture in the NBA, and it's a great way for these guys to rejuvenate their bodies with these unique schedules, but you almost always have a time to nap and get your body recovered.
Yeah, nobody's like trying to take a red eye back from the West Coast anymore, which I think a lot of teams used to do fairly often. You're laughing, so I'm guessing.
what do you mean nobody? Like I was doing it 2 years ago.
So, what do you guys think are the remaining kind of roadblocks, like this conference compared to like where it was 20 years ago? Like the acceptance of the analytics is, you can clearly see how it's mushroomed because we were in a little classroom, Dean, and now this is like Woodstock here, right? So, but what's left as far as getting to the final barrier of implementation, like across organizations?
I don't, like you guys probably know the barriers better than I think it is an organizational thing. You want everybody on an organization to have some literacy. There are going to be people who know it much better and some people who know it less, but I think the overall culture, having it throughout a team, I think really, really helps so that you don't have barriers of communication.
Yeah.
Well, what Dean said right there, communication. That's the barrier.
Yeah.
Right? The math is pure, right? There are a ton of capable people in this room that can do the work, that can cut the data, that can glean insights, right? If you're unable to communicate that to a coach, to a GM, to a scout, you're wasting your time, right? So if you're in school now, looking to break in, okay, engineering, data science, great. Mix in a communications class. That will differentiate you in the job market.
I'll add to that as well of like on the reverse side, like for me on the scouting side who doesn't come from a quantitative background, I think the reverse side is also there's effort from our end to at least speak some level of the language. I do think, yes, the analysts have to meet us at some level of halfway and use terminology that we understand, but we also have to spend time understanding what it means and what the different modeling is and what the different terminology is, especially in scouting. Like it's going to be used, so you have to spend the time also to like learn as much as you can. You're not going to be creating the data in the same way that an analyst is, but it also is some level of onus on us who are not quantitative backgrounds to at least feel comfortable understanding what is being outputted from the data and what the different terminology is and all of that as well. So I think it's both sides meeting more in the middle and not just fully on the analysts as well.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's a people business, right? So you're not just playing a video game, even though sometimes it can feel that way. One of the other big challenges of analytics in basketball in particular, so we come up with all these numbers and whatever, but everything in basketball is contextual, right? Like in Memphis, we had two players, Zach Randolph and Tony Allen, who were much more valuable for the way we played than probably to almost any other team. And there are other players who would probably be the opposite case, where they'd be less valuable for us. And so how do you solve for that as an organization where you're taking in these analytics and figure out the contextual part of that?
Yeah, I mean, one part is just trying to find similar situations that have happened in the past. How do these types of players fit on a lineup or a team? But I think this is also where, you know, you have to merge your evaluation system with either your scouts, if it's kind of a transactional thing, or with your coaches on what do you see in these other guys? Because it's actually a huge area where you can gain something. And we've seen this certainly like in baseball. Let's go get this pitcher. He's got this great spin rate. If I can change his arm slot, all of a sudden I've got a big improvement. What player can I go get that's going to be Tony Allen for us, that's going to fit into what we do? How will they complement our best players? So again, I think there's certainly some quantitative stuff, but that's probably one area where the merger of the two can be, you know, really important.
Something, not to get too niche, but we've talked about a lot in like international scouting on the different leagues and how do you like account for the context of like, are you including all European players that have made it in the NBA and comparing them to each other versus like the Australian league is so different from different European leagues, and how to compare those is always like an interesting question that I don't really think has been solved for. I think different people have different answers, but how to actually compare that to NBA translation as international players come over and how to use that data has been like kind of an interesting question as well.
Yeah, because those leagues, not only they're different strength, right, but they're different styles too, right? There's a physicality in Australia that is not maybe allowed in, say, France, right?
For sure, and you can account for like some of the high level stuff like that, where you just know obviously Australia is more physical, and not like, you know, the Euro League is a better league than other European, pan-European leagues as well. So there's some like of the obvious ones, but there's some leagues that maybe we don't know as much about, and someone's playing well, and how do you account for that, and how do you rank the leagues in comparison to each other? It's not a clear answer to that question at all.
Shane, from a player's perspective, like, is there, I'm trying to flip this on its head now, is there a way for a player to look at it and say, okay, here's what the numbers tell me about how I might fit in place X versus place Y?
You know, I knew the numbers better than anybody, and I had a very strange relationship with the numbers, all right? I didn't want to know what my weaknesses were, right? And, you know,
Really?
I did not want to know what I was bad at.
Okay.
Because I thought that would affect the way that my mentality. And my mentality is what got me to the NBA. And so I was afraid of anything. Well, thanks, Daryl.
Strays here.
And so, you know, I knew that eating broccoli was good for me, but I didn't want to know why. All right, for my own sake. And so, like Dean, we talked about, tell the stat that you researched, which I was unaware of until you brought it up, about me shooting less after the...
Oh, so the New York Times article that came out a long, long time ago, 2009, I think it was, about the No Stats All-Star right here. And it basically highlighted how good he was despite not shooting very much. And from the time the article came out, for another 2 months, he actually shot a lot less. He lived up too much to what was in the article, and it actually took away from the team a little bit over that period of time. And then it's like you forgot about it or something like that. But yeah, it was like people ask, does the media impact the game? And I use this as an example of a situation where the media did kind of impact at least one person's game.
But you were aware of the article? Like you read it?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
I loved it. I loved it.
I was just curious.
In his living room.
I give Michael Lewis a hug every time I see him. Thank you, Michael. But it did affect me, though, because that was the problem. Like, I learned, you know, I was able to see what was behind the curtain at the Wizard of Oz, at the Emerald Palace. Right? And once you see what's behind the curtain, you can't unsee that.
But I think this is a great point, because you have to think about what you say to players and how it's going to affect them. And that's why we talked about, like you said, you're not going to sit down with a player and talk to them, because you can't have 10 voices. But also, you may think you're helping, but now the player's like, oh my God, I didn't realize I'm on a hot streak and now that's going to affect me. Or,
Yeah.
you know, oh man, they're like doubting that I can make this shot. Like, no, that has to be a cognizant effort to figure out not just what to say, but when and how.
And what's the purpose of it, right? Like, what are you trying to get out of sharing this? Are you trying to get them to take a different type of shot? Or what are you actually like? What is the purpose of the next step of you sharing this information with them as well?
So we had Russell Westbrook, and Russ is great. Russ is a tremendous person to have around. We loved him a lot of ways. Well, we got him after his prime days. And one of the things, Russ is interesting in so many ways, but one of the ways, he was a great free throw shooter for a lot of years. He was an 80+% shooter, I think, every season after his rookie year for like 8 or 9 years. And then it plummeted to 60-something%. What did we do there? Like, I don't know what to do. And Russ is legendary. Russ is strong. He knows, how do you communicate that to a superstar? Like, some of the coaches, we talked about it, and eventually I'm just going to go and show Russ what he did 4 years ago and let him kind of figure it out. And it did help. He got better. But I didn't give him numbers. He knew that there was a problem. But he needed to kind of process in his own head, not us tell him. That was my thought.
The psychology of this that I didn't really get until I worked in the league was how important irrational confidence can be for players at this level. And how, like, it actually does. It is a real thing that actually matters.
Yeah.
And because there have been times where you see people kind of lose that confidence in real time.
Have you seen the odds of making the NBA? They're not good. All right? So if you don't believe in yourself, no one else is gonna.
So one of the other things that we've learned, hang on, let me go back. One of the things analytics has done, we've changed the game, we know 3's worth more than 2 now, and changed all that. But what can we say is next? Where is analytics' next impact going to be? What's the next frontier for it?
I mean, I'll throw out the sports science and player performance. There's definitely some room to do there. And then I think, we continue to get new data. So somebody's going to figure out how to use this pose data to do something cool. I think we've had, obviously the 3-point revolution. There's been a couple other things that I think have been out there, but I won't say them. Maybe others can. But if we knew what's next, we should do it. But I do think that's one area I'll point to that, whether it's getting your players healthy, more optimized when they go out there, something along those lines.
So I have a book out, and one of the things I talk about in there is a Disney technology that they have for reading the faces of people who are viewing a movie. So they used to screen movies and survey the people who watch them, and they would ask whether they liked the movie, what parts they liked, and all that sort of stuff. It was never nearly as accurate as just having a camera in the screen looking at the people who were watching it and reading their facial expressions and everything. So there's a way, my point is that there is some way to read body language and facial expressions that actually helps you. And I think that some of that could be applied in basketball. I think it's hard because people are moving, not like you guys sitting in seats and stuff. But I think it's interesting, and it's completely different set of data than what we've ever worked with.
Yeah, I would say, like, as a player and, working in the front office for many years, the most important skill set a player has, and the Hall of Famers have it, and those not in the Hall of Fame don't have it, is the ability to handle pressure in a game. When there are stakes, can that person execute? Can they finish plays? Can they follow the game plan? That is something I think everyone's trying to figure out, right? And that goes to your point, sort of the mental capabilities and mental potential of players. That is the holy grail, because that wins championships for you.
Mental potential and training, like what kind of different, even like tools out there right now that like helping you be as ready as you are late in the game, at the start of a game, and different kind of tools. And I think that goes in the sports science thing that Monty mentioned. But yeah, the different types of training and how you can use that stuff as well.
Is there any way for teams to like incorporate this subjective information into models? Like, well, I mean, everyone's been in a meeting at draft time, right, where you're having a 45-minute debate about whether somebody's a good kid or not so much, right? And all that entails. And is there any way to like make that more predictive somehow?
I would say yes. It's harder because you have to have a history of it to know how predictive it is, and that's harder to collect in some sort of systematic way, whereas if it's data, box scores, you could just go back, it's already been collected in that way. But yeah, your scouts or your intel scores or your coaching ratings, like something that's more subjective like that, you probably have to distill it to something that can go into a model, but as long as it's got a history and it's consistent, you can test how predictive it is. So
yeah, and it's more team by team right now. With like, if we're talking by any like psychological assessment, there isn't like really, you know, like I don't know super well what they do in the NFL, but like the Wonderlic assessment is the one I'm thinking of like standard across the whole league. Like there's not as much of that in the NBA, so to have all these different teams only start doing something and only have a few years, it's kind of hard to actually get to anything with that. And yeah, what are you actually going to use? What's actually going to work is kind of a tough question.
yeah.
And then even in any draft, there's only 60 players, or 59 or 58 if teams do stuff, but we won't get into that. But the
Catching a lot of flyers today.
I think they got one too, if I remember right. But the you made me lose my train here now. Oh, what I was getting at was, is basketball always going to be more subjective just because we have this low end problem where there just aren't as many players over the course of a single year or a bunch of years as they have to look at in football or especially in baseball?
I mean, we certainly have a low end problem, but I think we're still the most efficient draft out of all the major leagues. Like, so I think one is the qualitative view of these guys. I mean, big, tall, fast, strong, dunk. Like, you know, a lot of the best players have been that. I guess I can't give that anecdote, but there's been guys that have gone number one that is very obvious, and you probably don't need much more than to see them once. Yep. And they're very tall, and they can shoot it from 35 feet, and you should go try to draft them if you can. And I think the other benefit we have is mixed lineups, right? So we were talking about this. This is really the basis of the No Stats All-Star is we have box score stats, we have all this stuff, but on the other side of like everything that you do on the floor will eventually lead to showing up that your team wins when you're out there. Now, it may take a ton of time to show that. That's the issue where you need longer time, but we do have that over other sports outside of, I guess, hockey, where you can kind of use the more top-down approach.
All right, one more for you guys. The analytics of managing the salary cap, because now we're in a situation where we have these aprons, we have these other restrictions and these kind of discontinuities that result because of that. How much more of a challenge does the new CBA create in terms of just using analytics to build your team?
We were debating around the league how active it was going to be going in, and my answer after incorrectly predicting that for years is teams are just going to find a way. And so, you know, there's a lot of smart guys out there, smart girls out there that are helping their teams, and teams want to make their team better. And so, you know, I think this year we just found that one of the solves was to use a third or fourth team to help facilitate a deal, and we had one of the biggest trade deadlines ever. So, you know, certainly there'll be times where it's a little more difficult, but you know, all these folks here and everybody kind of starting out and helping teams just find ways to, within the rules to help their team, I don't think it's going to slow it down too much.
It's like Jurassic Park, life finds a way.
Finds a way.
Great line. All right, so we got some audience questions now. All right, so this is a good question here. What will separate the next generation of front office execs from their competitors?
Good players.
There's definitely luck involved.
Thank you, John.
Definitely.
Lottery luck.
Yeah, there's definitely luck involved.
Hubie Brown, another Hubie story. the best clinician ever in the history of basketball. And his first lesson to every coach that would come from around the world to hear him speak, he said, I'm going to tell you the most important thing, I'm going to tell you all, the most important thing about winning basketball games, playing a basketball game. Goes up on the chalkboard and says, if you do not have good players, you will not win.
It's true.
Yeah. There is, Shane has given a little bit of a humorous, but yeah, the players are what matter. And I think having the humility to, whether it's a coach or an exec or a scout or an analyst or anybody, like these are the guys going out there doing it. How do you get the best ones and how you put them in the best position to succeed? So having the humility to do that. And I think as far as executives, like there's just so much breadth of the job now. And so I think it's going to be the people that, probably unlike me, that can actually handle all that. You know, you mentioned the communication, the personalities, understanding analytics enough, understanding scouting enough, understanding coaching enough, realizing at the end of the day, you got to get those 15 guys to go and play together in the best way possible. What can you do to do that? As opposed to like one single skill that, you know, an exec might have.
On that too, like to go back to the deadline and how people figured out how to use the third or fourth team with all the rule changes that happened last year, I think like seeing how quickly teams have been able to adjust to rule changes and actually like not having it affect negatively like their ability to make transactions is kind of a testament to like how smart front offices have gotten around the league. And like maybe previously rule changes would have been a little bit slower to adhere and a little bit slower for people to adapt to, but the fact that rule changes happened last summer and it didn't really affect how things were going, I think is a testament to front offices being smarter and, you know, being able to handle a lot of things like Monty said.
Well, one last thing I'll say there is, especially with this CBA, and shout out to Mark Toyota and Aram Talmudian, wherever they are, but we had our cap guys study it and then teach our front office so that they know. And so as we're creating ideas and ways that we can do this, it's not just two guys that we have to rely on, they're teaching the rest of our group so they have an understanding of not just what we're up against, but what are the teams we're trying to do something with up against, because you might have to solve their problem to help your team.
And that goes into some of the analytics stuff before where it's like you do have different experts within a front office, but like the ability to be well-versed and like you have a salary cap expert, but also like the non-expert has to be well-versed and able to converse in it to an extent as well.
Absolutely. I mean, that was one of the things I found in Memphis. You're on the phone with another team. Like, you need to know what the cap possibilities are while you're on the phone with them. You can't, there's not enough time in the day to like, oh, let me wait, let me get my guy, and then we'll have a meeting and talk to you about it in 2 days. Like, you sort of need to know what's possible while you're talking to them. And then you can get down to the nitty-gritty details. I do agree to your point. I mean, just from the outside, it seemed like the league incorporated this cap and things like how to use the mid-level exception, for instance, much more quickly this round of CBA than maybe the previous round. I had another question asking, are the most recent generation of coaches who were players, using J.J. Redick as an example here, but there are other ones, more receptive to using analytics since they were used to having it when they played?
I would definitely say for sure. Yeah, we had DeLon Wright on our team, and DeLon, he told me he's not a numbers guy, but I had useful conversations with him around that. So I think the new generation is very, very open to it, even when they don't want to get stuck in, you were describing it, you don't want to be told a weakness. Well, for different players, they may want to be told that, but there's certain things they don't want to know, but they can converse in it. It's having a minimal level of it, and that is so much higher than it was before.
DeLon's 8 weeks with me in Memphis probably just really rubbed off.
Well, probably maybe upsetting.
Are there any elements of the game, this is a really good question, are there any elements of the game, either on the floor or in running a team, where you think analytics has had a negative impact? I heard you snicker like there is one.
I think for our fan base, a lot of fans think it makes the game too complicated. And at the end of the day, we are an entertainment product. And so we need to do a better job of maybe educating our fans and making them aware that this is kind of the new reality that we're in. And we could actually do a better job of entertaining fans with the data. I don't think we do a great job as a league with that. But I would say that's probably the biggest drawback with this numbers revolution.
I think there was one case when I didn't actually see it, but I heard about it. I think in the like 20 years ago, the broadcaster for the Warriors would put a win probability graph on the screen. And you get to like 90% or something, and it looks like the game's over. That's not very helpful. Because 90% is like, oh, it's like a 3-point lead with a minute to go, and the game's not over. And so I didn't think it was particularly helpful in that way.
Encourage people to turn the TV off, too.
Yeah, I don't think that's useful.
Yeah. So you guys aren't involved in this specifically, but how do you guys feel about all the analytics and data they're now using on the officiating side? Monty's like, oh, he's trying to get me fined. But because they are using a ton of information now that they never used before in evaluating and processing all this stuff.
Where's Evan? I don't know. No, I think anything that that is an objective way to create more of a meritocracy is going to be positive in the long run. What you have to do is make sure that those things are actually being used to correctly identify whether it's officials or whatever. What's the paradox where once something becomes a measure, it ceases to be as good of a measure?
Peter principle, is that what that means?
No. I know the one you're talking about, but I can't remember the name either. Once it becomes the test, then people change their behavior to fit the test.
You have to guard against that. But otherwise, I think as long as it's used in the right way, it'll be a positive.
Those guys have such a tough job. Refs have a tough job. So anything you can do to help them, like I tried to appreciate those guys even when I thought they screwed up. Yeah.
It's really interesting talking to them and seeing all the things that they are evaluating that you didn't even think about. Like if you have the opportunity to do that, and and what they talk about when they send out even those public points of emphasis is pretty wild in terms of how you realize how complicated their jobs are and how much new stuff we give them every year too. How much value, here's another question from the audience. How much value do generational leaders like LeBron and Chris Paul, let's say, who elevate their teammates' performance, how do they impact your analytics and your long-term strategy?
In what?
I guess from a team building perspective, like when you have this guy, what does that change about everything else that you do?
I do think the top players, they have to be obviously your leader, your best player, and that just kind of infiltrates, down to the rest of the team as long as they're on the same page with the coach and everybody. But I think on the kind of quantitative side, we've found, I think, even more ways that those players impact and help their teammates on the floor, whether it's the spacing of a great shooter or maybe somebody like a LeBron or somebody has a higher turnover rate than somebody else, but really what he's doing is saving turnovers from his teammate because he's putting them in a position where they just have to finish a play. And so those guys actually help your turnover rate. So I think all those ways, whether it's shot selection, we've had some success with guys that have good shot selection that filters down to others. So, I think all those ways in addition to just the tone they set.
There's one guy up here who played with LeBron James.
It was me.
Yeah, I couldn't remember which one of us it was, but
Here's my LeBron James analytics story. And LeBron is one of the smartest players of our generation. All right, he's amazing. He was actually very open to the data. I mean, LeBron is very meticulous about learning and growing. And so we were playing, I think, the Thunder, and I had the numbers on Kevin Durant, and I knew that he was much, much better shooting a turnaround jumper over his right shoulder versus his left shoulder, all right? It was significant. And so before the game, I said, hey, Bron, if you get on KD, just do me a favor. Just make him shoot over the left shoulder in the post, okay? So as it happens, LeBron was on KD twice. And both times, LeBron was supposed to made him shoot over his left shoulder. KD missed both shots, okay? After the game, he said, damn, Batman, that was awesome. What else you got? I didn't have the nerve to tell him about sample size and variance. I didn't think it was appropriate at that time. But after that, any number I gave LeBron, it was okay by him.
That's frankly
So
a lot of.
yes, I'm taking credit for LeBron being the greatest player of all time. Basically, that's what I'm saying. Yes.
Now we know the real story. The true no stats all-star, right? It made LeBron James amazing. Okay, since we're starting to run low on time, I'm going to get back to the kind of the holy grail question. Analytics versus the eye test. I mean, how much of our evaluation today has it got to the point where we rely on the analytics, and how much is still kind of the eye test of your?
One thing, I was at the soccer panel earlier, and Luke Bourne mentioned this in soccer, but the one thing that the new data has given us is you're speaking the same language much, much more with your coaches and your scouts. But before this was a three-pointer, and now it's like, this was a high pick and roll by this guy with the corner filled and the, heavy rotation, and you could pull the video immediately. So I think that part has been a huge, huge benefit. Both the data you're giving, because now you can say, here's what our pick and roll efficiency is, not just this is just like our overall efficiency. And then second, to show video and speak that language that's been a huge part of, I think, especially with the coaches.
I was just gonna say, on a super basic level, if you're not finding a way to be in the middle, kind of similar to what Monty's saying, and use it together, it's almost like not really seen in the NBA anymore. You're finding ways in the middle. It's like you're having a conversation, and maybe you're trying to isolate the eye test and isolate the analytics so that you can see maybe what's being missed and what are the holes between them. Why are you only seeing this and the analytics showing differently? Like, what's happening here? What's causing this maybe disconnect? And how can you find something within that disconnect? But having those types of conversations of why is the analytics showing this, or why are your eyes showing this and it's different? And how can we get to an answer using both of those things? And if you're not, that's just, it feels like tough to be in this NBA and not be using both.
I will say we have actually a panel tomorrow at 11 o'clock that is quant watching tape. So that's where putting the eye test and the numbers test together.
Great. That's a perfect walkout promo right there.
We done?
Well, the clock's showing 0, so I assume they wanted us to wrap. Are we done? Is that a wrap? Okay. I played to the buzzer.
Yeah. I think that was a good buzzer beater by D.
All right. Okay.
Good stuff.